How many people read the book? All right, a few hands have gone up. So it is a powerful book. I definitely recommend. It's an easy read. It's a beautiful read. But I wanted to start off with this short video of Paul in his own words, and to see him, because it's just powerful to hear him and then be able to hear his story. So we're going to watch this, and then we'll get into the discussion. So.
Clocks are now kind of irrelevant to me. Time, we're used to have kind of a linear progression feel to it, now feels more like a space. If you asked me when I was 17, what I'd be doing with my life, I would have said, oh, I'd definitely be a writer. For me, literature was always a powerful reflecting tool for thinking about life. But found after I completed my undergraduate studies, and for the first time really thought about what I was passionate about, medicine was in fact the perfect place. In the life of a neurosurgery resident, time is linked to progress, and as the numbers on the clock increase, so too should your progress towards some goal. I first began noticing symptoms in my 6th year of residency, and so I ended up having a full-body CT scan, and there were metastatic lesions kind of all over the place. Obviously, Lucy and I were both very suspicious that I had some form of cancer, but actually having the confirmation was still devastating. And so we were in the hospital room, and we just kind of laid there and cried a little bit, and then called my parents, my brothers. After finishing chemotherapy and coming out of the hospital and entering this recuperative phase and not working, the time is very different, where I'm not thinking about how each 15 minutes is going to contribute to some greater productivity. Verb conjugation is particularly confusing for me, for the verb to be. I finished neurosurgical training, so I am a neurosurgeon. I'm not practicing currently. If I get healthier, I plan on getting back into clinical medicine. So in that sense, I will be a neurosurgeon, or I won't, depending on how things go. And so I don't really know what the correct tense to use is. I am, I was, I will be, I had been. There's definitely a funny double sense I have at, say, clinic visits. As a physician, you're constantly concerned about how far behind you're getting and how many patients you have to see. And the faster you can get through your appointments, the better. And so, whenever I see a doctor, there's always an awareness in my head that little clock in the back of their heads is ticking. Certainly, medical training is very future-oriented because it's all about delayed gratification. And so you're always thinking about 5 years down the line, what are you going to be doing? 5 years down the line, I don't know what I'll be doing. I may be dead, I may not be. And so it's not all that useful to spend a lot of time thinking about the future beyond lunch. Since Katie's birth, my time with her has had a very peculiar and free nature. in all probability, I won't live long enough for her to remember me, or certainly not have any clear memory of me. And so, the time is what it is, which is fun, because she's a really good baby. There is a disjunction in time between how I perceive time and how I perceive my daughter Katie's time, because she's in this rapid phase of development, whereas my sense of time is very static. And so there is kind of an inherent tension between those things, which, sometimes when I'm reading a baby book or someone remarks, kids grow up so quickly, there's kind of a pang, because I'm not going to see, most likely, that growing up happen. And the faster Katie grows up, the faster I'm not there. At the same time, every day is an exciting, rewarding, meaningful time to spend with her. Hope is a very funny thing. Certainly as a doctor, I felt it was very important, and the way in which patients come to understand and make meaning of their diseases is one of the pillars of what matters about being a doctor. And the way hope functions for me now as a patient, it's a careful balance. If you don't think about the bad case, that ending is going to be very rough on you and your family. But if you don't think about the good case, you're going to miss an opportunity to really make the most out of your life and time. I met a traveler from an ancient land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them,
and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is SMAADallas, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone level sands stretch far away."
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.
Okay, well, thank you for watching that. If it was hard at some points to understand him, but you can find that video on his website, paulkalanithi.com. And I thought it was important to hear his voice and to see him before we start talking about it. I read the book first. I didn't go online and watch any videos or read any reviews or anything like that beforehand. And I wept during this book because he is so smart. And he has 2 bachelor's degrees, a master's degree, a doctor in medicine, and in his writing, number one, it's beautiful and poetic, but two, you could also see how learned he was. One of his BAs was in literature, and he always wanted to be a writer from a young boy, and so he just soaked up all of these beautiful works of literature, works that I cannot read. My brain doesn't work like that, nor would I be able to understand probably half of them. But it made me jealous that he has read all of this stuff and he's internalized it and he's made it a part of who he was. And I just thought, and I just cried, and I was just like, he had such a love of learning and life and words, and this illness, this disease took over and cut all of that short. And as a priest, we have to compartmentalize, and we have to put aside a lot of these feelings of grief and sadness when it comes to death, because we have to be strong for everybody else. But it was in this book that allowed me, as the human being and not the priest, but also the priest a little bit, to weep for him, and allowed me to weep for all the other people that I love in my parish that have died as well. And so it was a very moving experience. So if you didn't catch, he was a neurosurgeon, and he was in his residency. He was the chief resident at Stanford, so very prestigious, very smart. He was working on getting ready to actually be accepted to a new program for neuroscience at Stanford. They were pretty much creating this position for him, and he gets sick. And the book is divided into 4 parts. Maybe make sure I'm saying that correctly. He writes this prologue that's a little bit about his life as a child or as he's getting to his diagnosis. And then part 1, In Perfect Health I Begin, is really his journey from adolescence to medical school and how he got to where he was on the moment of his diagnosis. And in actuality, that part 1 was the last part he wrote. He actually wrote the second part of his memoir, from learning about his diagnosis until his death first. And those last moments of his weeks of his life is when he wrote part 1. And then his wife finished the book, and that was very moving and touching. One of the things that I found remarkable was his sense of not only being a doctor, and as a doctor, finding ways in which to connect to his patients. We've all seen doctors fly in and out of the rooms that we are waiting in. If we're lucky, we get 15 minutes with the doctor. Those of us I know that have gone through other things are very fortunate and have great doctors that will spend lots of time with you to go over everything and to be that human element, not just the medical side of things, but really see you as more of a person than just a case. And so he got that. He got that understanding long before he was even sick. And that's what I think made him in touch with not only his patients, but with himself once he was diagnosed. And he writes, I received the plastic arm bracelet all patients wear, put on the familiar light blue hospital gown, walked past the nurses I knew by name, and was checked into a room, the same room where I had seen hundreds of patients over the years. In this room, I had sat with patients and explained terminal diagnoses and complex operations. In this room, I had congratulated patients on being cured of a disease and seen their happiness at being returned to their lives. In this room, I had pronounced patients dead. I had sat in the chairs, washed my hands in the sink, scrawled instructions on the marker board, changed the calendar. I had even in moments of utter exhaustion longed to lie down in this bed and sleep. Now I lay there wide awake. A young nurse, one I hadn't met, poked her head in. The doctor will be in soon. And with that, the future I had imagined, the one just about to be realized, the culmination of decades of striving, evaporated. He had, from a young age, been seeking and searching what is really the meaning of life. How do I live life? How do I experience it the best? But because of his learning and desire to be challenged academically, but also to strive for the best in that way, he missed out on that living. He missed out on those moments that are captured before you get to the end of your life. And so he worked so hard with all of the schooling and the degrees and the studying and the millions of hours in the hospital. And when it was time for him to actually live, when he'd gotten through the hardest part of it all, he had to learn how to die. He missed out on the living part. And so I think about that room and what that meant for him, but what it means for all of us. Because he wrote everything that we experience when we're in that room as well. That we get those good news stories sometimes, and sometimes in that instant our life is changed. And that room, gosh, if it could talk. The stories it could tell, the things that go on in that room. It's just quite powerful. One of the things that I was surprised by was the deep relationship that he had with his faith. There's a couple places where he quotes scripture in the book, but a lot of times when you see extremely learned, especially English literature folks and scientists, that when you put those two together, faith doesn't always fit in there. There's not a lot of room for it sometimes. But he found a way to really capture and hold on to his faith. And at one point, he wrote, "Had I been more religious in my youth, I might have become a pastor, for it was the pastoral role I sought." It was the pastoral role in his being a doctor that he sought. And that's what made his connection and that bedside manner and that being able to share life's ups and downs with the people he cared for so easily. And it made it so much more meaningful. And so that was a great image for me. And then he continues through his book to sprinkle in church images. And this one is one that I thought of. He's talking about working with the patient and being in surgery. And he says, "Removing the tumor was satisfying, even though I knew the microscopic cancer cells had already spread throughout the healthy-looking brain. The nearly inevitable recurrence was a problem for another day, a spoonful at a time. Openness to human relationship does not mean revealing grand truths from the asp. It means meeting patients where they are, in the narthex or Nave, and bringing them as far as you can." And whether he knew what he was writing at that point or not, I'm not sure. But that's what God does for us. God meets us where we are. God meets us either in the narthex, and we're too scared to walk through those doors, or God meets us here in the Nave, in these pews, as we worship and as we sing and as we share in Christ's body and blood. And so it just is powerful that he had this in him. And it made me weep even more because it just was so real. There was nothing, it was all genuine. There was nothing fake about it to me, because there are people who can easily be fake in situations like this. But so he continues and talking about that. And then another piece of kind of biblical, scriptural, faith stuff. He was talking about how some other doctors had written books, and they're very, this idea of atheism and not really connecting to an other or spiritual or a higher power. And he writes, "Yet I return to the central values of Christianity: sacrifice, redemption, forgiveness, because I found them so compelling. There is tension in the Bible between justice and mercy, between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the New Testament says, you can never be good enough. Goodness is the thing, and you can never live up to it. The main message of Jesus, I believe, is that mercy trumps justice every time." The main message of Jesus, I believed, is that mercy trumps justice every time. And gosh, this week we know that all too well, that mercy does trump justice. And that it was in our gospel today. It's what we have to believe and hope in and experience ourselves. But he understands all that. He understands that this isn't the God of the Old Testament punishing him, but it is the God of the New Testament providing this love and care and mercy and grace and peace in his life. And to know that he's done all of what he did, and he has his whole life looking forward, and to answer those big questions. As he was getting to the end of his life, his wife wrote in the epilogue for him that she wrote, "Often I return to the grave after leaving flowers, tulips, lilies, carnations, to find the heads eaten by deer. It's just as good a use for the flowers as any, and one Paul would have liked. The earth is quickly turned over by worms. The processes of nature marching on reminded me of what Paul saw and what I now carry deep in my bones, too. The inextricability of life and death, and the ability to cope, to find meaning despite this, because of this. What happened to Paul was tragic, but he was not a tragedy." And I think that's just profound. What happened to him, what happens to us, to the people we love, it is tragic. But their lives, our lives, are not a tragedy. God created us in God's image, created us to be loving, caring, wonderful children of God. And God creates nothing bad. God creates nothing wrong. And so, in no way are our lives a tragedy. They are holy, fully, 100% holy. In his last words that he wrote, he said, "When you come to one of the many moments in life where you must give an account of yourself, provide a ledger of what you have been and done and meant to the world, do not, I pray, discount that you filled a dying man's days with a sated joy, a joy unknown to me in all my prior years, a joy that does not hunger for more and more, but rests, satisfied. And this time, right now, that is an enormous thing." And so he puts it very simple, that all that life culminates to is simply to be fulfilled with what has been given to you, to not want for more, because it's easy for us as Americans, very easy for us to want more. but be fulfilled with what we've been given and know the joy that is in that. So, powerful. Very, very powerful. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any ideas? Yes?
Lisa, just one comment. I read the other day a quotation, "The privilege of a lifetime is to be who you are." And I really take that to heart for myself. Sometimes I speak when I should be quiet and fail to speak when I should be speaking. But I think that's what he's saying to us.
Mm-hmm.
He became who he was
Right.
in God's image.
So Bill said that he was thinking about the phrase, the privilege of a lifetime is to be who we are. And that Paul really embodied that. And that's something that he strives to do, and perhaps something that we should all be reminded of. Others? Well, I encourage you to read this book. I encourage you because it reminds us as individuals how to live life to its fullest. It also reminds us that the doctors that we see and the people that are in the doctor's offices and going through treatment and struggling with whatever they are struggling with, that they need that mercy, and that tension that they live in, both as patient and doctor, is not an easy one. And we've all experienced it at some point, but not all of us have experienced it to this point. There are other things online. I thought this one was the best because it was his own voice. Re-listen to it. And then one of the other things that was said here. His wife said that she fell more in love with him towards the end of his life because he was beautiful and deeply focused. And we see that in how he cared for his baby daughter. We see that in the interactions that he had with his family. We see that in what he did up into his death. He continued to strive for that existence and meaning of life and to live it to its fullest. And I think that is how we all want to be remembered and to be loved when it comes time, and not to be distracted by things that don't matter, really. Yes?
Along the same lines, when I read the part about his struggles with whether he was a neurosurgeon, will be a neurosurgeon, is a neurosurgeon, it reminded me that as spiritual humans, we're so much more than our professions.
Mm-hmm.
And he was realizing that, I think, during the course of this book.
Yeah.
And that was a real lesson.
Yeah.
You know.
So the idea of not knowing, is he a neurosurgeon? Was he a neurosurgeon? Will he be a neurosurgeon again? Struggling with that identity piece, and that realizing that he's more than just that neurosurgeon, that he is a husband and a father and a friend and a son and so much more, and trying to find that identity in that quest for a great life. Thank you. Yeah.
I didn't read the book. I'm just curious how long he lived past the time of this video.
He was diagnosed and then was alive for 22 more months.
His wife is an internist.
Yes, she is a doctor.
Through medical school, they did it all together. Then, after he had the diagnosis, he decided he
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so they made the really tough choice of, do we bring a child into this world knowing that I'm dying and, you know, that the child's going to grow up without a father, and how do we do, is it, and there was I don't know if I marked this or not. He said, when they were talking about having the baby, he said, you know, well, she said, wouldn't it be hard to know that you're going to die and you're going to miss seeing your child grow up? And he said, yes, it's going to be hard, but isn't that great? You know, he acknowledged the challenge in that. I don't know if it's on any of these, because he says it so much better than I can. And so he said, yes, it will be harder for me to die knowing that Katie is in this world, and I'll be leaving her. But isn't that how it's supposed to be? So. All right. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you so much for being here this morning. Appreciate it.